Utility Fleet World. It's Kurt Moreland, Associate Publisher with Utility Fleet Professional, with another episode of Under the UFP Hood. You know, in the early beginnings of March, I had the opportunity to go to the NTEA Work Truck Show, and the first day they have the Green Truck Summit. And I was fortunate to catch one of our utility fleet brothers, Matthew Betz, who's an expert fleet optimizations position at DTE Energy. And he provided some insight and some interesting things. So, Matthew, I want to welcome you to UFP Under the Hood.
Thanks, Kurt. I'm happy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about how you became a fleet manager, and also DTE. What is the area of the country that you guys handle?
Sure. Yeah, so my background, I like to joke that there were Model Ts when I first started in fleet, but it's not quite that bad. I started in fleet back in the 1970s, so I've been in the industry for quite a while. And it's interesting because I was in major fleet sales for almost all of my career, and met a gentleman that at the time was the director of fleet for DTE at a conference, and he asked if I might be interested in changing my position a little bit. So I moved to the other side of the desk, and now I'm on the fleet management side of the program. DTE's got a pretty big and diverse fleet, like most utilities. We cover all of the state of Michigan, but with different roles. So in the Metro Detroit area, we are the electric utility. And for the rest of the state, the outstate area of Michigan, we provide gas utility, but never both in any location.
Let's dive a little bit into your presentation. So one of the things that you said that really caught my attention is that you guys wanted to create a rolling laboratory. Tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, so we were given a goal very early on by our CEO, who said he didn't want to necessarily be on the bleeding edge of electrification, but we wanted to be a leader. And so I interpreted that to be sort of a thought leader in the electrification process. And so we put a lot of work, many people on the team, not just me. We put a lot of work into, how do we structure an EV program so that we're more certain of the success and avoid some of the pitfalls that other fleets had experienced. And so we created what we call the experimental rolling laboratory. And that is really just putting some, structure around adding EVs to the fleet. And so, we do a lot of research about, of course, like everybody does on any vehicle, about what EVs we want to introduce to the fleet, what business roles that they could meet, and then we buy them. We introduce them to the business units and the mechanics that are going to be working on them, so the drivers and the mechanics. And then we have sort of a 1-year period where that group of vehicles is in what we call the experimental rolling laboratory. And it's just a organized way of introducing these vehicles to our fleet, where we do a lot of education around those particular vehicles. We survey both the drivers, the business units, and the garages about how the vehicle's operating. We share feedback with the OEM, who are very interested in, how their vehicles are performing in our fleet. And of course, being based in Detroit, we have very close relationships with at least the U.S. OEMs, the GM, Ford, Chrysler guys. And then at the end of that year, we decide, which vehicles are going to continue to be ordered, and if any, maybe have had a less than stellar experience, we would discontinue ordering. We're going to have to keep the vehicles in the fleet and live with them, but we might not order additional batches of those vehicles.
That sounds really good. It sounds like you guys are really on the cutting edge, and that's why I'm so happy that you're our guest here under the UFP hood because it is April. I think Earth Day's coming up. Everybody, it's a hot topic, sustainability and EVs. Tell me about some of the vehicles that you currently have in your EV fleet and what works for you, including EPTO.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of things that I think you'd be interested in. For right now, the EVs, the BEVs, are limited to light duty cars and light pickups. So we've got just under 20 Chevy Bolts. We've got about 50 Ford Lightnings, and we've got another 25 Chevy Silverado EVs coming later in the year. So light duty. We'd love to put some vans in the fleet, but the vans we've looked at so far do not meet our range requirements. So we continue to look for some vans that we can test. We're just a week or so away from introducing our first Class 6 truck, which is a Peterbilt that'll be configured as a stake truck and used in our business support groups. And then for our EPTO, we do use Alltech as our supplier for almost all of our utility type vehicles. And we are putting GEMS units on those so that the vehicles don't have to idle the whole time they're out at the job site. And we're having some pretty good luck with the GEMS units.
Wow, Matthew, you guys are being really aggressive. Those are some larger numbers than I typically hear. So that you've got a lot of experience. Let's go back to, you mentioned a little bit about training and shop maintenance. What's it like to set up your own EV charging station? What are some of the challenges that you or one of our listeners might run into?
Yeah. So there have been challenges. I'll take the shop part first. I really don't have a lot to do with operating. In fact, I don't have anything to do with operating our shops. We do have 26, I think, garages in the Metro Detroit area. I, of course, work with them when we're looking at adding a model, an EV to the fleet. We want to make sure that it's something that isn't going to cause the garage any problem. So will it fit in the building? Will it fit on the hoist? Is it something that they can work on? We have a training group within DTE and specifically several people assigned to fleet. So we are working with them. They in turn are working with the OEM, and we'll provide mechanics in our shops that are going to have EVs assigned to them with OEM training on how to maintain EVs, because of course there are some things. While there's advantages overall in maintenance cost for an EV, there are some things that we need to be concerned about. We did get fairly aggressive on the charging program with the number of vehicles we anticipate delivering over the next couple of years. We wanted to make sure we had more than adequate charging. So in our locations around the Detroit area, I've already had about 135 EV chargers installed at those locations. That number will be 300 by the end of 2024. And there's there's some challenges when you're installing that many chargers. One of them is just the cost, right, of buying and installing that many chargers. You have to trench through asphalt parking lots. It's not just the cost of the charger. In fact, I think that's one of the tips I would give people is to try to work with within your company or a trusted supplier, and try to figure out what the average cost of installing a charger is going to be by the time you consider adding power to a facility that might not have enough power for the amount of chargers that you're looking to install, and the cost of the chargers themselves. And I like to tell people it's sort of like the wild, wild west. So that's my second warning is be really careful about the providers that you're working with in terms of buying the chargers. Make sure that they can deliver on what they promise. Follow up on references and maybe even go look at some of the installations. But really choose somebody that you can trust for the charging. The other thing that we didn't, I guess I shouldn't say we didn't think of it, we're learning as we go, is home charging. So while DTE does not allow any personal use of our vehicles, we do have drivers that are considered home start because they might need their vehicle, in the middle of a night if the storm pops up. And so we have a program to install home chargers in those drivers' homes, and we've had quite a few of those, dozens installed. But we had to learn how to develop a reimbursement program for those drivers. So they're using their own power at home to charge those vehicles, and it's our responsibility, at least DTE feels, it's our responsibility to reimburse those drivers for the power. And there are some good programs out there, but we had to find them, and we found that they might not be as developed as we thought they would be. So we're working with those providers and helping them understand our needs and getting our drivers on a good reimbursement program.
That sounds really good. And again, it sounds like you guys are really out in front and have an aggressive program. Another quick question for you is you guys had some of the worst storms in the history of Michigan go through. How did that affect your charging stations? Did you guys lose any productivity because of the storms, or did you have backup power in place, or how did that all work out for you?
Yeah, I would like to say that, and a couple of these storms were historic in nature. We had an ice storm last month that was the worst storm in 50 years for our company, and the second worst storm in over 100 years history of our company. And they were, quite damaging to the area. We had a lot of power outages. And of course, it impacted some of our drivers' ability to charge their vehicles. Our program is still very new, so we probably had more of an impact than we will a year from now. But we're still in the process of investigating some portable charging solutions. So should we have a storm like this and drivers are expected to be out on site for maybe 10 or 12 or 16 hours at a time, if their vehicle has to idle, well, not idle, but if they need their vehicle running, they're likely going to need more power when they're on site. And so we're investigating a couple of different ways to get portable charging out to those work sites so that they can charge and continue working. And, I'm happy to say that there are some really good solutions out there. We just haven't decided on which ones we'll use and didn't have them in place for this historic storm.
Yeah, and back to the charging, I myself have found, when people first started researching this, I only thought there were a few players in the market. But as I go to industry trade shows, and even I'm going to put out the word that ACT Expo, which is out in Anaheim, California, actually next month in May, you really start to see you have a lot of options. There's a lot more vendors out there providing chargers than the big brand names.
Yeah, there are a ton. That's sort of what I was referring to with the wild, wild west. There are a lot of suppliers. We're starting to see that some bigger companies are buying up some of the smaller players, and I hope to see them adding some structure around how those companies operate, because you can run into a situation pretty easily where a lot of promises are made, and it's hard for those smaller companies to keep those promises, and that causes a lot of problems for a utility that's trying to implement a program.
Yeah, one of the things that I heard at the Green Truck Summit, and maybe you can address it, is there's no standardization in the industry. So different vehicles and different charge companies can have different plugins.
Yeah, that's starting to become less of a problem. That was an issue. All of the level 2 chargers that we have now use the J1772 plug that has become a standard. You can get around some of the issues. For instance, Tesla has its own type of charger, but you can get adapter kits. So if I have a vehicle that is not a Tesla and the only charger that's available out at a public charging spot is a Tesla charger, I can use an adapter to have one of my vehicles charged there. But you're right, it's not like a number of other areas of industry where the entire industry has settled on one standard. But I think we're probably moving in that direction.
That's a great tip. All right, well, we're going to lighten things up a little bit. Anybody who follows my podcast know that I love a good wildlife encounter story. And as luck would have it, you mentioned that you are a wildlife photographer. So tell us a little bit about that, and tell us about any interesting animal encounters you've had out there in the field.
Well, what a great way to take a little break in a podcast or an interview like this. Yeah, so I do sort of fancy myself as an amateur, and I'll emphasize the word amateur photographer. I like nature photography in general, but wildlife in particular. I do a lot of bird photography. There happens to be a great sanctuary near my home that I can go to. But the one that came to mind was actually more of a wildlife encounter. I was out visiting Rocky Mountain National Park, and as anybody that's been out there knows, you go through the town of Estes, and so we stopped at the famous Stanley Hotel and had lunch before going to the park, and asked for some advice. I particularly wanted elk pictures. And they said, oh, well, here's, the areas that you go to within the park, but keep your eyes open as you drive through Estes before you even get to the park, because you're likely to see some elk, roaming around. And I didn't take it seriously, but I'm driving down the main drag in Estes, and all of a sudden, my friend that was with me reached over and she grabbed my arm and said, stop. And I thought I was about to hit something I didn't see, but I stopped the car, and she points her finger out her window. And here there are 2 elk with their horns locked right on the roadside. And it was like a little roadside park or something, because it looked like wilderness behind it. And so I just took a picture right through the open window of the car. And if you see it hanging on the wall in my house, you would swear I stalked these elk and crept up on them and got this really amazing picture when it was taken right off the side of the road. Of course, I don't tell anybody that story when they compliment me on the picture. I let them think I stalked them and found them out in the wilderness.
Well, that's a great story. Yeah, normally when you're driving through a community park, you expect to see the local Little League game, not 2 elk engaged in combat.
That's right.
That's great. And I recommend people take that trip. Our family took the trip too, and we were trying to find moose. And somebody said when you get to the other end, so you start in Estes, when you get to the other end, there's a campground. Pull in there. Sometimes there's some moose there. And so we pulled in, and this guy was packing up his tent. And we said, hey, do you know where we can see some moose? And he goes, yeah, there's one right behind me. And we thought he was kidding us. And sure enough, we looked behind him, and there was a young moose eating in the marsh right behind him. So it's a great area.
I wish somebody had given me that advice. I would have driven all the way through the park instead of turning around halfway.
I'll have to email you that some pictures that I took of that encounter. But you mentioned the Stanley Hotel, and that has kind of a tie into what we're talking about too, because didn't he invent the steam car?
Yeah, there was actually one in the lobby of the hotel on display. Yeah. It's
So
also where the movie The Shining was filmed.
exactly, yeah. So here we are talking about EVs and alternative fuels, and we have a tie into a famous hotel in our conversation. So let's get back to business a little bit. One of the things you did in your presentation, which I thought was really, really interesting, is you don't just hand your drivers the keys, you actually do an EV driver safety training, because everybody has been brought up to drive a gas combustion car, but not everybody has ever driven an EV car before, and you feel it's important to walk them through it.
Yeah, we've got a couple of things, that we do from an education standpoint for our vehicles, but more specifically to safety. DTE, like most utilities, is very keenly focused on safety. And so we wanted to make sure we covered any area that might be different from driving an ICE engine. And so we've worked with our internal training department that creates their own training videos. And we created actually a series of 3 videos. They're very short and easy to watch. But one of them is how to charge an EV safely. Another is safety features of the vehicle itself. And then the third is what to do in case of a crash, because that is a little bit different than if you're driving an ICE engine. So for instance, we recommend that they get out of the vehicle as soon as it's safe to do so. They follow all the regular procedures they would follow if they were in a crash with any other DTE vehicle, but we recommend that they stay at least 20 feet away from the vehicle and upwind from the vehicle in case there's any damage to that battery pack. And then we created a QR code, a little decal that goes on the dash of every EV that reminds drivers to watch the video before they drive the vehicle. Now, for the assigned driver, that gets us those videos get assigned to them through our normal training process. And they have to watch those videos and get credited for that through training before we'll hand them the keys. But for anybody else that might just jump in the vehicle to move it or something, we still want them to have that same information. And then the last part of that EV training is before we hand the keys to the driver, we invite them to what we call a walk around. And we go over again the safety features. We talk about one pedal driving. We talk about the fast acceleration, any other features about the vehicle. And then we ask them to take a little quick spin around the parking lot so they can feel the one pedal driving and also the acceleration before they take the vehicle out on the road.
That's fantastic, Matthew. And you bring up a good point. The first EVs that were out, they were kind of like glorified golf carts, but the EVs that are out now, they're a lot faster than people may anticipate. So I think training to give them a feel for that is a good idea. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I can tell you from personal experience, like I said, I've been in fleet for, it seems like forever, had a chance to drive almost every fleet vehicle there was, on the road. But I got a chance to test drive a local EV manufacturer here in Detroit. They put me in one of their pickup trucks and told me that it does 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds. And a gentleman that I was with said, "I don't believe it. I've got a Corvette that won't do that." But I jumped on that in a safe spot. I jumped on the accelerator, and I've never had my head thrown back into a headrest as hard as it was in that vehicle.
Wow, that's a cool story. I wanted to ask you another question too. One of the things that you use the term ICE, so we don't want to assume that everybody knows what ICE stands for. So go ahead and give us a definition of that.
Sure. ICE is a reference to internal combustion engines.
Okay. And then also for those who are not familiar with charging, there's different levels of charging, isn't there?
Yeah, most of our chargers, so the 135 that I mentioned, are level 2 chargers. So for a typical vehicle, if it's down to 20% charge and you want it to get up to 90 or 100%, it's going to take about 8 hours. So those are designed, in our case, for overnight charging. Driver finishes with his shift, brings the vehicle back to the location, plugs it in, charges overnight. It's ready when he comes in, or she comes in the next day. And that's also true with the home chargers. They're level 2. We do have some, or one right now, but a couple of others planned, DC fast chargers. And those would provide that same charge in just over an hour time. So the issue though is, bigger trucks like that Class 6 truck are designed to be continually charged on a level 3 or DC fast charger, where your smaller vehicles, every time you use one of those DC fast chargers, it can degrade the battery a little bit. So you're looking to come to some equilibrium, I guess, between, do I want to wait 8 hours or do I need to charge it faster? And over the lifetime of the vehicle, how many times am I going to need to fast charge, because I don't want to degrade the battery to the point where the vehicle isn't useful anymore.
That was an excellent explanation. I have a note here. I don't know if this was from your presentation or not, true or false. 100 vans charging takes the same amount of electricity or power as a Walmart store from one day. Was that from you?
Yeah, and don't hold me to that. I think that's what I heard the gentleman say. I heard somebody from DTE doing an industry presentation, and what he was talking about, it's actually a really good point that I'd like to bring up in terms of another tip, and that is, call your utility early. And if you are a utility, then get some internal knowledge to play and working to your advantage. And so in his situation, he was talking about, look, you might have a local plumbing company that has 100 vans and they think they're going to just they want to become all electric, which is great for the utility and for the environment. But they think they're just going to install 100 chargers in their on their little lot with their building where they keep their vehicles. And they don't realize that there's probably going to have to be more power run to their property. Their property probably doesn't have adequate power to charge 100 vans. And so that was the story he used to sort of emphasize that point.
You used a term which I really liked. Was it CI?
Yeah, continuous improvement. So that's, I guess, my other tip is one of the things I was lucky enough to have available to me is a lot of internal resources at DT. And somebody recognized early on that using electric vehicles was going to be a big change for our organization in many different aspects. So a lot of organizations have a continuous improvement department, or CI, and they help you create processes. And at DTE, we have a wonderful department. I've used them a number of times. We've partnered with them. They've done great work. But we have another group that I think was even more impactful, and that is called change management. So where CI helps you develop the process, change management comes in and helps you recognize all the different areas where this is going to impact somebody's job, or they're going to have to do something differently. And then they help you. They've got 100 different tools that they will help you apply to the situation to minimize the backlash that you might get. So it's all about anticipating how this might be different for the driver and what he's going to have to do, and how do we explain it to him up front so that there aren't any surprises, and how do we get feedback from him, so we understand where the pinch points are and where they're uncomfortable, and then what do you do to address those issues. So those probably between that group and our internal facilities team. So I had another expert assigned to my group from facilities, and he's the guy that has all the knowledge about how do you get more power to the buildings, all the sort of knowledge about our buildings and the condition and the shape and the services they have to them now. And probably as importantly, he's used to working to the industrial with the industrial electric contractor so that they work together. All I need to do is say, we need 20 chargers at this site, and they go in and figure out how to do it and give me a quote on what it's going to cost. And they're the ones that get all the work done. So big picture, I guess, my suggestion is just leverage whatever expertise your company has to offer. Take advantage of it, and it's going to make the job a lot easier to accomplish.
Wow. Speaking of expertise, Matthew, this has been a great deep dive into the subject of sustainability and EVs. Again, I just want to ask you if you have any final recommendations for our listeners, because I look at this podcast as not just going to utility fleet managers, but it's appropriate for all types of fleet managers. And I also want to toss in, did you work with Clean Cities? Because I find Clean Cities is a good resource for people just getting into this.
Yeah, we are members of Clean Cities. We also have a little bit odd since we're in the Midwest, but we have a connection with and actually hosted last year's conference for CalStart, which is really focused more on the West Coast, but we have a very active Midwest group for CalStart. And so we've partnered with them. So yeah, all the organizations out there that gather knowledge and expertise and help each other go through these processes are worth the effort to get involved with and to try to share information with.
Well, again, I want to thank our guest, Matthew Betz, the expert fleet optimization at DTE Energy, for being our guest here at Under the Hood with UFP. And thank you again, Matthew, for being our guest and making some time in your busy schedule to be with us.
Thank you. Great conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to remind all of our audience out there to roll safe out there.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Utility Business Media and its employees. It is strongly recommended that you discuss any actions or policy changes with your company management prior to implementation.